We started on new jobs. We had a new dog, a new apartment. Adrie was moving into more of a teaching management position. I was doing my dream job, which was helping give education to underprivileged children through organising volunteers. And the biggest project was raising money from all the staff and other people in Vietnam to build a school in the Mekong Delta. And we managed to do that in our first year. I think it was $70,000 we managed to raise. I got to go down and see the school from the beginning, the middle, and the end. Adrie was a big part of that. We did lots of events. That was just one of the proudest days of my life, was going down and seeing that school being completed. And so moving into the beginning of 2020, we had already planned a massive trip away. We'd planned it for over a year, really. We'd been saving up. And then what happened? Welcome to an extra special episode of a Vietnam podcast with me, your host, and a very special guest today. She is the #1 fan of a Vietnam podcast and has been since the very beginning, and is the one that pestered me the most when we took a hiatus to start again. She has been my wife for 11 years, with me for 13. Somehow she puts up with me, and somehow she loves listening to this podcast. And my guest today, who's going to help me tell this story, is my beautiful, amazing wife, who you've all probably heard me talk about a lot, is Adrie Lopez Mackay.
Hello.
Now, Adrie hasn't been, why am I calling you Adrie? The name's Adrie. Adrie hasn't been on the podcast since season 3, which we did from government mandated quarantine.
Yes.
So that was all the way back in 2020, as everyone will know. So in the last episode, I shared our story of how we ended up in Vietnam. So we went through how we came here as backpackers, did the teaching course, then ended up signing a contract, becoming an English language teacher, and then staying in Vietnam. And we got up to the first 2 years, up to where we had a dinner with all of our friends and family and told them, surprisingly, that we weren't actually leaving for Oman, that we were going to stay. So in this episode, we're going to pick up from where we left off. And if you haven't listened to that episode, then please go back, but you don't have to. But jump back to the last one and check that one out. But in this episode, we're going to cover the next 2 years. So what happened next? And again, if you are a regular listener of this podcast, you will know that 1, my memory is shocking. And 2, I normally just default to saying, oh, Adrie probably knows the answer to this. So I just thought, well, for this episode, I'll just get you on and then you can correct me in real time. Or I'm going to let you actually talk for once and let you tell the story. So we did the dinner. We decided we were going to stay in Vietnam. We weren't going to leave for Oman. Then what happened next?
Well, in 2018, when we decided that we weren't going to leave, I think there was a bit more permanency to our life. Well, we decided we were going to be a bit more permanent, I guess I should say. And with that came obviously new jobs. We both got new jobs, and the most important decision, to get a dog. Is that what you were waiting for?
Well, yeah, I was waiting for that. Yeah, I mean, that was a crazy decision. We'll just share with people, because a lot of people, I think, want to know, this series is titled The Expat Life, and why did we make a decision to get a dog, and why shouldn't you make a decision to get a dog?
So, yeah, it was a big decision because if we were ever going to leave, we needed to be sure that we were capable of taking an animal out of the country. And then 2, I think, at the time, maybe it seemed more pronounced, maybe it's less so because pets are becoming more commonplace here or more part of the family. But 6 years ago, I mean, dog snatching was a big thing. It still is a big thing. And you really have to be careful. Dog poisonings on the street. And yeah, dogs get snatched for dog meat because that still is consumed, and also to be resold at the market for pets for money. So I think we were quite serious about it, and we just put the feelers out to the family that my sister got her dog from. And we weren't really serious about getting one in January, but that's when we kind of asked, January 2019. And yeah, the family came back and said, oh, we actually have a litter of puppies that will be ready, that is ready now. And this is around Tet 2019. So we asked to see and meet the remaining 2 or 3 puppies, I think. There was 1 girl and 2 boys. And we expressed that we were mostly probably interested in a girl. And rather than them bring all 3 puppies for us to see, they only brought the one. And the one was Biscuit. So we saw her. And of course, we were like, oh, we'll just go look. And then we'll decide. We probably won't decide to get her. So, I mean, if you've ever met a puppy that could potentially be yours, like, what are you going to do? So we met her and then we decided we would get her. And she was such a little weirdo. She still is. And then I think after meeting her like 2 weeks later, she came home with us, or maybe a week and a half later.
Well, at this point, we were living in Phu Nhan, and as I've mentioned before, so we've lived all over Saigon. So we started in D7, as I mentioned in the last episode. Then we moved to District 4. We lived there for a couple of years. And then now we got these new jobs. Again, our life changed quite dramatically. We moved to Phu Nhan, which is just kind of north of District 3, just over the canal. Really nice neighborhood, quite busy, but the nicest apartment we've lived in Vietnam, in Saigon. So we kind of moved up a step, and it was dog friendly as well. So we were in a completely different living environment to where we'd been 2 years earlier. We had new jobs that were better paying, better benefits, things like that. And the funniest thing you skipped over, though, is we messaged your sister asking, where did you get your French Bulldog from? Because she has a French Bulldog, and Adrie has been obsessed with French Bulldogs for years. If you look over on her Instagram feed, it's just all French Bulldogs. And we mentioned to Erica, where did you get Barley from? And she immediately was like, oh, hey, the family have a new litter, blah, blah, blah. And she was like so excited for us. And I don't think we probably would have gotten Biscuit if it wasn't for Erica's enthusiasm, but also exactly like you said, we met Biscuit, fell in love, obviously. We went to Phu Quoc for Tet.
Yeah.
And then we came back and picked up Biscuit, and she's been part of our life now for how long?
Well, she'll turn 5 in November. So she was 3 months old when we got her in January 2019.
So it is a big decision to get a dog as an expat. We weighed it up at the time. Again, so everything right now is pre-pandemic. There was a way to get her back to New Zealand. We would have to live in a rabies-free country for 6 months. So we were looking at South Korea or Taiwan. Then we would take her back to New Zealand after 6 months, because Vietnam is literally like the least rated country on the ratings list of rabies-free countries. So even though she has a rabies vaccine, doesn't matter. She is in Vietnam. So we looked at all of that and we thought, yep, that's fine. We don't know how long we're going to be in Vietnam. No idea at that point. But we got her because we wanted her, and partly because of Erica's enthusiasm, because I don't think we were really 100% ready. But Erica was just so enthusiastic that we were like,
I think we were ready. We'd already decided, okay, we'll look into getting a dog. I just don't think we thought it would happen that quickly. And part of the rush maybe to get a puppy that was part of that litter was because when Eric was getting Barley, they had wanted a dog for a few months, or more than a few months, but had been looking seriously for a few months. And they had to wait quite a bit for the dogs to breed, for the mom to get pregnant, for the puppies to be ready to leave. So like they had to wait quite a long time. And I do remember thinking like, well, at least we don't have to wait. We're expecting to wait a little bit, but I guess we're getting her now.
That's right. I forgot about that. So we started on new jobs. We had a new dog, a new apartment. Adrie was a teaching coordinator, so moving into more of a teaching management position, which suited her perfectly. I was doing my dream job, which was the community network manager of ILA, which was their social corporate responsibility department, essentially. So we're helping give education to underprivileged children through organizing volunteers. And the biggest project was raising money from all the staff and other people in Vietnam to build a school in the Mekong Delta. We managed to do that in our first year. I think it was $70,000 we managed to raise. I got to go down and see the school from the beginning, the middle, and the end. Adrie was a big part of that. We did lots of events. That was just one of the proudest days of my life, was going down and seeing that school being completed. And so moving into the beginning of 2020, we had already planned a massive trip away. We'd planned it for over a year, really. We'd been saving up. It was meant to be 3 weddings, 3 Saturdays on 3 continents. So we were going to fly to New Zealand for my cousin's wedding, see all our friends and catch up. Then we were going to fly to America for Adrie's cousin's wedding, catch up with all her family, then fly back to Saigon for our best friend's wedding, Lewis and Kim, who've been on the podcast. As you probably know, Lewis created the music that everybody loves more than the podcast, but I'm not bitter about that. And come back. So 3 weddings, 3 weeks, 3 continents. And we built the school and we were already starting to do fundraising. We were going to try and build 2 schools that year, then the year after 3. Everything was going great. Adrie's job was going really well. She was being lined up for a promotion for what they call an academic manager at the time. And then what happened?
So then I guess it was the end of 2019 where there started to be kind of little hints in the news that something was happening. And I think we started to get them maybe a little bit earlier than other parts of the world because we're in Vietnam, which shares a border with China. Not much of anything, but you see these things from time to time, like bird flu, swine flu, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's there. You don't really think too much of it. I remember I wasn't teaching a whole lot, and in January 2020, again, approaching Tet, Lunar New Year, and I wasn't teaching a whole lot, and I remember sitting in the teacher's room with my other teaching coordinators, and I just kept reading the news, CNN, various other sources, obviously Asia-related sources, and I was like, I think this is like becoming a thing. Like, this is like a thing, and at that time, we hadn't booked any travel for Tet holiday, for the Lunar New Year holiday, because we were going away in March for this big trip around the world. And I think maybe that's kind of why I was maybe paying attention to it a little bit. And then we decided kind of last minute to book a trip to Japan, like 2 weeks before, something like that. And we didn't have a lot of time. We had like 5 days. And I remember asking people, like, do we have enough time to go to Japan in 5 days for our first time? And the response was like, maybe not. But we booked it, thank God. Best decision ever, because it was our last international travel for like 2.5 years after that. Oh, well, besides our ill-fated trip to...
So depressing, but so on.
our ill-fated trip to New Zealand, which we will get to soon. So yeah, it just quickly ramped up. And then because Vietnam was very... what's the right word? Just very on top of the pandemic before, well, the virus, I should say, COVID, before it was really even named. They made the decision at the end of January to not cancel schools, but move schools online. Some of the younger schools, I believe, at that time, end of January, early February, were like the kindergartens, they were closed. And then language centers like the school I was teaching at and and universities went online. And so, yeah, that started pretty early for us in 2020. I remember weeks, months later talking to people around the world, and they'd be like, oh yeah, when schools closed. I'm like, yeah, we've been living this since January. Been a thing. Yeah.
Well, I remember my most cringe moment ever, and I've had a lot of cringe moments in my life. But one of them was, obviously I was doing stand-up comedy at the time, and I remember it was probably late January, packed comedy room, and I'm like, this is like an overreaction, right? Like they'd already gone online with some of the schools, and I was like, does everyone else think it's a big overreaction? And everyone was like, yeah, everyone's clapping and cheering. And yeah, it clearly was not an overreaction at all, and the best decision ever. So the pandemic started raging, or the virus started raging, but in Vietnam it was slow to take off, so to speak. What happened with our decision then? How did we end up in New Zealand, as we've alluded to? How did we make that decision? And then what happened when we came back?
Yeah, so like I said, really monitoring the situation, paying like very close attention to it. It wasn't because Vietnam was so stringent about the controls very early on, not really closing the borders, but monitoring them very carefully. They might have closed the Chinese border pretty early on. I can't really remember.
I think they did.
Yeah, so monitoring the situation a lot. And then Erica, obviously working at RMIT, being on the leadership team there, she was getting some kind of inside information and kind of letting me know, this might happen and then it would, or this might happen and then it would. But at the end of February, we were leaving on March 10th. That was when our flight was. And we looked at kind of where at that point COVID was a thing. And obviously by that point, it had been pretty rampant in Europe. It had kind of started to make its way to the US. And because of Vietnam's reaction early on, we knew, I think, going into our trip that possibly we weren't going to get to the US. We thought we can go to New Zealand. Let's see how it goes. At the time, there was no virus in New Zealand. There was no virus in Australia. A few cases in Japan. There was that big cruise ship that was off the coast of Japan. And so we thought we'll take our chances. If worst case scenario, we'll come back from New Zealand and we might get put in quarantine because I think kind of they were starting to put people in from Europe that had traveled or been in Europe in quarantine, government quarantine.
And if I can just jump in there as well, the thing was it hadn't been declared anything official. There was no official pandemic or anything like that. So I remember afterwards people asked us, like, why didn't you cancel your trip? And it wasn't that simple because it hadn't been announced, right? So we'd have lost like thousands of dollars, which we did end up losing in the end. We got some of it back, but we ended up losing a lot of money anyway. But at the time, it wasn't so simple to just cancel your trip. As Adrie said, Australia and New Zealand were pretty much COVID-free. I think there was 5 cases or something like that. So it was like almost COVID-free. No, not even, right? So we had this like really difficult decision to make. Are we going to go? We said, right, let's go to New Zealand. We'll make that first wedding. Probably not going to go to the US. And then we'll get back for the third wedding. So we got on the flight.
Yeah, well, I'll just add to that is we, as we've mentioned, have Biscuit. And at the time, we were using trusted house sitters. So we actually had a house sitter staying in our apartment. She was American and she is American. And, so she was relying on our place to stay during the 3 weeks that we were planning to be away. So, yeah, there were a lot of different factors that played into our decision to go. I know before we left, we kind of had a lot of like 3 strikes that probably should have made us stay. But ultimately, I despite the stress and anxiety, I'm glad we went because we got to see family and friends. But so we got on the plane to New Zealand. Well, we got on 2 separate planes to New Zealand.
Forgot about that. Just quickly tell them about that.
So we had quite a long layover in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it was.
And we didn't realize until quite late that we needed, because it was like over the 8-hour threshold. We didn't realize until quite late that we needed a visa for Australia because we were over the transit
It was 8 hours
amount of time. So we both applied for visas online. I got mine immediately, and Neil applied for the wrong one, and his took like days and days and days, and then it got rejected because it was the wrong visa. So we went to the airport. So it was too late to apply for visa. So we went to the airport and we tried to rebook him on another flight that would have a shorter layover so that he wouldn't need that transit visa or that whatever visa. So that was one of the flags where you're like, well, maybe we shouldn't go. And so that happened. So he got on the flight. So we did take the same flight to Australia. But when we got to Australia, we had to part ways. And Neil booked the later flight and got to New Zealand like 3 hours before me. I was sitting in the airport in Sydney, and Neil's like, car rides just picked me up. We're going to have a beer. I'm like, I was so annoyed. I was like, I'll just get on my flight now. Yeah, I forgot where we were going.
So we got to New Zealand. We hung out with friends because obviously we'd lived there before. They put us up. We had an unbelievable time. We got to our storage unit, which was so exciting. We got to like go through and find some things. Exciting for me. If anyone who knows me or follows this podcast, I've put on a bit of weight, a bit of muscle in the last few years. So half my clothes that I pulled out of storage didn't fit. So that was exciting. But yeah, so we had a great time in New Zealand. And I remember, I think it was the Tuesday night. It was Liverpool played Atletico Madrid, I think, if I remember rightly. And there was like 50,000 fans there. And that was the 19th of March. That was the last big event before they declared it a pandemic on March 20th. And that event should never have happened. Like thousands of fans from
No, I think
Spain.
so this is where my memory that supersedes Neil's comes in. Because actually, when we left New Zealand on March 10th, it wasn't declared a pandemic. I believe it was declared a pandemic on March 11th or 12th. It was literally
not 20th.
No,
oh.
It was no. You've gone
This is
ahead.
why Adrie's
It literally was when we got to New Zealand, and then again we got there and we were like, "Crap! This is going to make our return to Vietnam quite difficult." Because if things were already here, they were going to escalate even further. And you say it was such a great time. So Neil and I had slightly different experiences in New Zealand because I was keeping track of like the world news and what was happening in New Zealand and Vietnam and the US. And Neil was a bit oblivious, just kind of living in La La Land. And because Vietnam was behind behind us in time, I would usually wake up to a slew of messages from my sister, like, this is what's happening now, this is what's happening today, this is the news, blah, blah. And then because, again, we were ahead, I would, at night, I can't remember what, but I'd have a different source of information. So it was just constant amount of information coming in. And I'd usually wake up in the morning and update Neil and be like, oh, this is what's happening today. So I was pretty anxious a lot of the time. And those early days in New Zealand, unfortunately, coincided with the first few cases in Wellington. And it even so happened, like, one of the cases went to a cafe that we had been to, and like, because Wellington's not a big place. And that was in that week leading, you said March 19th was that game.
Well, maybe that game was March 10th or 11th then, because I know it was the day before it was declared.
Okay,
because it was like the last big sporting event.
Yeah.
We can double check it, but we're not gonna. But I remember it was a Liverpool game at Anfield, and all the Spanish fans had to travel, and it was just like, that should never have happened.
Yeah. Because we had, like, I remember we landed on like I think a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we had a couple of days before Lindsay, your sister, arrived, and the hens and stag doos were on the Saturday. And it was like that. Yeah, I think it was that Saturday was when, or the Friday was when the first couple of cases started to like creep up. Like, literally, it was like 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. But it was really scary at the time, especially being in a small town or a small city. And then, yeah, the other night I remember just being like, this is so dumb, was St. Patrick's Day, the 17th.
Mm.
Because we'd been out, but every day it was just getting more.
I remember everyone was nervous.
Yeah,
there was like a nervous vibe in the air.
Well, we were also staying with our friends Nora Cartwright, and our friend Nora, like, her work was like, you cannot get sick, basically. You can, yeah. So she was really nervous already.
Well, then my sister arrived. So it was our cousin's wedding. My sister arrived from Australia, and she has quite a high up government job in the healthcare sector. And she had been in New Zealand for less than 24 hours. I mean, less than 16 hours, I think, when she got a phone call from her manager back in Australia in Melbourne and was like, you need to come on the next flight back tomorrow morning. And then she's head to Adrie, as they're obviously all out drinking and having fun, enjoying the bachelorette. We just call it hens party. It's way easier than a bachelorette party.
Bachelorette.
Right, hens party. They were all at hens party having a good night, and then Lindsay takes Adrie aside and she's like, Adrie, I gotta go tomorrow.
Yeah, she went from like tipsy fun to like game face on, like, I'm out of here. I was like, whoa.
And so it got serious, like, really, really quickly. And yeah, we were having fun with friends. We were going out, catching up, obviously having drinks. I remember waking up every morning, pretty hungover, but Adrie would be on her phone and she'd be like, we gotta go. And every morning I'd be like, yeah. And then eventually it got to the point where
we had to go.
So the wedding was on the Saturday. And won't go through all the details, but we ended up having to leave on the Friday.
Yeah, if you want all the details, go listen to the podcast.
Let's go listen to season 3. Yeah, we go through it all. We do it. So we end up getting a flight back. It's one of the craziest experiences ever. The airport staff don't know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. But anyway, we get back to Vietnam. Then what happens?
Long story short.
Yeah, give them the long story short.
We had to jump through a lot of hoops and hurdles and over a lot of hurdles to get back. Because, well, the what you didn't really mention was just that the threat of Vietnam closing the borders, which a lot of countries eventually did, but at that point, I'm not sure how many countries had really like actually closed their borders. But we had been getting the information that Vietnam is gonna close its borders, and that was just like every day it was kind of like brought forward 12 hours or another day, and so that just kept creeping closer to our departure date. Though we were like, yeah, we need to get the F out of Dodge.
I did forget that very crucial part of the story, is that the information that Adrie was getting was that the borders were closing. And then even I got a text from the HR guy, was like, the borders are closing tonight. And so if that had happened, obviously Biscuit would have been looked after, but we would have been without Biscuit. We're residents of New Zealand, so it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I mean, our life would have we probably would still be in New Zealand to this day if we'd have got trapped there. So we got to Vietnam. Somehow, when we arrived, they wanted to send us straight back to Australia, even though we didn't live there, just because we'd come through there. But we managed through some miracle, don't believe in God, but this is like the biggest miracle that ever happened in my life. We got sent to government quarantine, which is what we wanted. And we ended up spending 17 days at Tuduk National University, which didn't end up being terrible, wasn't great. No mattress, no aircon, no deliveries after one day, and no alcohol for 17 days. So you can understand our pain. But we met Nasta, who, again, has been on this podcast a couple of times. She ended up having to flee Ukraine as a refugee. So you can go back and listen to that episode. She's become one of our best friends in Vietnam as well. So it had a really good silver lining. After 17 days, we got out, and it's taken us this long to get here. But the crux of this episode I wanted to talk about was, what was expat life like in Saigon during those COVID times? Because the big thing I want to make clear is the more and more I talk to people over the years, and even now to this day, everybody's story is completely different. No two people experienced the pandemic anywhere in the world the same. Some people loved it. Some people got time off to spend with their kids. Other people were completely separated from their partners. Other people obviously died as well. Obviously, other people got sick. Really, really terrible. But so the point of this episode, though, is to share what was our life like during the pandemic. So we got out of quarantine, and what was life like?
Well, we first got reunited with Biscuit, which was the most amazing feeling. That was the longest time we'd ever been apart. And then when we first came out, Saigon was under a little bit of a lockdown. That was in April, or shortly thereafter went into a bit of a lockdown. But that wasn't very long-lived. The worst part about that, and my memory of that, was it was way worse than government quarantine, because we were back in our apartment. We had our dog. Okay, not way worse. But we were so excited to finally have aircon, and our stupid aircon was broken. But because there was a bit of a lockdown, we couldn't get anyone to come fix it. So I remember trying to work from home and just sweating, even though the aircon was on. It was miserable.
My first memory is getting a delivery of beer from Misha Smith of Pasteur Street and just chugging a can of passion fruit wheat, because I was like, oh my God, I haven't had a beer in 17 days.
But that was quite short-lived. That was a few weeks long. And then because Vietnam had shut the borders, they had like and I don't know if other countries did this, but definitely not America, but every person that had COVID was given a number. It was like patient 1, patient blah. And you knew, I mean, that was, by that point, there was like only, God, I don't know, tens of cases, and they had the numbers.
The UK spent billions on a track and trace system, I believe, that didn't even work in the end. Whereas Vietnam just published their address in the newspaper and their initials and was like, this person went to this cafe here, here, and here. Don't go there. If you were there, let us know, and you're probably going to get quarantined.
Yeah.
And people here, for the most part, were really like all in it together, willing to help out. And there really was only tens of cases. So we had that initial kind of lockdown. And then 2020 was
good.
Pretty cool, actually. Yeah. So it got to the point you couldn't leave the country, right? So this was the biggest thing. Nobody could really get in. You had to have like special visas, really difficult. And if you wanted to leave, you weren't going to get back. So a lot of people did leave. We obviously weren't going to leave. We had a dog and we had jobs. So we decided to stay. And 2020 was pretty awesome. The pollution cleared up was one of the big things right away. The sky got blue again. You did not see elephant pants anywhere in Saigon. Like, it was amazing. There was but I mean, yeah, you missed the tourists. There was no tourists. It obviously had a massive hit on business, especially tourism. But that meant that a lot of the hotels and resorts were putting their prices down. And for people like us that love a deal, we were able to do, basically go to loads of really nice hotels like the Caravel, the Intercon, Amiana Resort up in Yachang. Where else did we go? The Amidst, was that part of that? We did like...
This is your favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah, we basically did all these really nice resorts and hotels that normally would be unaffordable, but we were able to do it because they had them on a discount. But the point I want to make with that is, though, we barely posted any pictures on social media. I remember going to Amiana and it was like heaven. It was quite quiet as well. There's not many people there. We had an amazing weekend. I did not post one picture on social media because for 2020, the rest of the world was on fire, basically.
We definitely had a bit of guilt having like a pretty comfortable life. But I do remember, despite the guilt, like of being able to travel and stuff, that was the silver lining of being locked in a country that you're not, I mean, we're residents, But if you think back to when we re-entered the country, they wanted to send us out. Like, so it was, yeah, we took advantage of it for sure. Why would you not? But it was really challenging being unsure of when you'd ever be able to leave this country that we live in and we love, but we're not, I mean, we're foreigners. And I remember the feeling of walking down the street, like you said, we didn't see elephant pants and blah, blah. But like after the months passed, like you'd walk down or drive down the street, whatever, and every foreigner, you'd be like, okay, that person is not a tourist. You could just be like, those people, they, I guess, could have got stuck here, but those people have been here for X amount of time, or those people live here. And eventually you just started seeing less and less and less and less foreigners. And then eventually when the borders did reopen, it was like, they're like I don't know, a wild animal, an exotic species.
Well, like an elephant, because I vividly remember seeing the first person walking down Towdy End Street with elephant pants on, and I was like, whoa, the borders are open. Like, I vividly remember that. But you'll know that, you'll know if you live in Saigon, even if you're Saigonese, if you're Vietnamese, and especially if you're an expat and this isn't where you were born and brought up, you do need to leave regularly for your own sanity and your own peace of mind. And we found that, and we found that out a long time ago. That's why we travel so much, not just within the region, but within Vietnam. Saigon is an unbelievable city, but it is crazy, and it starts getting crazy at 6 a.m. and it doesn't stop till about 2 a.m. There's literally only a few hours in the middle of the night if you go out where the roads are quiet. The rest of the time, the roads are busy. People are out eating. And so sometimes you need a break from that. And so when you are locked in the country, we could go and travel, as we mentioned, but there's only so many places we could go to. And that is where it started to impact on your mental health, because you could not, I mean, you're trapped. So at the end of the day, okay, at that point, 2020, you weren't locked in your house, which is obviously a massive invasion of civil rights or whatever you want to call it. But to be able to not leave the country, and especially being from different countries as well, so we can't visit our families. COVID's ravaging the place. Everyone's going through different difficulties. So it was really, really difficult, even though we got to travel and do all these cool things. We were watching our families in the US and the UK and our friends in New Zealand struggle greatly while we were off in Amiana gallivanting, but so it was still tough. But during this time as well, 2020, for my job, which was based on doing events, mostly in bars and clubs, not clubs, but in bars, doing festivals to help raise money to do things like build a school, all of that pretty much went out the window. So it became, and all the teachers were struggling for money as well, who we were meant to be raising money from. So as a job, it became really, really difficult to raise money to help children, right? Which was the same around the world. So that happened to me. Then at the same time, the school we worked for couldn't bring in teachers from anywhere, basically. They could a little bit, but it was really, really difficult. So that meant that they asked me to teach more, right? So I had been a teacher for a couple of years previously. So they were like, it started off, I think, 1 day a week. You know, you run the same contract, but can you teach X amount of hours? We really need your help. Yep, no, obviously no problem, because the country needed it, the company needed it. It was an unprecedented situation. So over the year, I was teaching more. And then by the time I think it got to like August, September, I was almost teaching like 60, 70% of my hours and not doing my real job much at all. And because, to be honest, there wasn't really much we could do, so it was fine. But I kept pushing back, saying, you know, are you going to renew my contract? Are you going to renew my contract? I was in the second year, and I think there are some laws in Vietnam that if you get a third-year contract, I might be incorrect on this, but I think if you get a third-year contract, you're pretty much guaranteed a contract for life or until you get sacked or something like that. Now, it's like a big deal. Like once you get that third year, it's kind of like that you get it renewed, maybe anyway. So I pushed and pushed, and eventually they came back and they were like, no, we're not going to be renewing your contract. So we had a big decision to make. And then how was your job during that year as well? Because you were on the front face of the company doing...
The company at the time, rightly so, I think was starting to cut. You unfortunately were a casualty of it, but the higher level jobs hours, before they were cutting teachers' hours. They moved all the teachers online as much as they could, but I think enrollment struggled. And for me as a teacher coordinator, I was the first to lose my teaching hours because the teachers needed those. So I had like admin support hours. But the longer that the teaching online kind of went on for. In 2020, I think it was a bit back and forth. Like we'd be face to face, and then there'd be maybe a threat of the virus, so they'd throw us online, and it was kind of back and forth and stuff. But the numbers did kind of slowly reduce in that year. So I made the decision to actually, this was immediately, hold on, I'm thinking out loud now, but this is pretty much immediately after the very first lockdown in April 2020, that I should apply elsewhere to a job that would be more, or at least another job that would be more consistent. So that's when I applied to RMIT, and then it wasn't until, with all the interview and work permit process, it wasn't until October that I started, and then I started teaching at RMIT in November 2020. So I was kind of doing double duty for a while. I'd pretty much given up my teacher coordinator role when I started at RMIT, but I was still doing some like placement testing and SAT courses for ILA at that time. Yeah, it was really exciting to start a new job and thought it would be pretty normal. Classes were face to face, and then again, the end of 2020, go rolling into 2021.
Things were pretty good apart from my job. And we had a big decision to make, and I've talked about this before. It was like a sliding doors moment. At the time, a Vietnam podcast was still doing pretty well. I'd been contacted by a few people to help them make a podcast. So I was doing that. I was running comedy shows all over Saigon, and I started off with one. Then I got approached by another bar, then another bar. So we were doing like one a week. And had we started doing them at the Hard Rock by that point? My memory's so bad. This is where I need you.
I don't
You
know
can't
the
remember.
timeline of the Hard Rock shows.
No, but so we at one point during the pandemic times, we started doing shows at Hard Rock. So for me, things were going well on that side of things, and with losing my job, we decided, okay, it's time to take 7 Million Bikes forward as a business. But it was more still all over the place, trying to focus on what it was: comedy, podcast, events. I did like a music show with Coastal Connection. And it was maybe going to be an entertainment company. I had really no idea what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, but then I really had no idea. And so that's kind of how 7 Million Bikes as a company started, was 2021. And then I think it was around about then we started doing shows at the Hard Rock. 140 people, I remember, was the first one, like absolutely packed, amazing. We went to Dalat, and I remember there was a weird kind of vibe in Dalat, right? When was that again?
That was the holiday weekend at the end of April, early May.
Yeah, and we went with a small group of us, and you felt something was coming. Because the other big thing to point out, I guess, at that point is 99% of people in Vietnam hadn't been vaccinated. So it's 2021 now. Vietnam had been shut and enclosed, and not much COVID, whereas the rest of the world had been getting vaccinated, and Vietnam was pretty much completely unvaccinated.
Yeah. I think at that time is when we kind of were like looking around. I mean, like, this paradise isn't going to last, because you could see what was happening in the rest of the world. A lot of places were getting back to normal. They were getting their first dose of the vaccine. There was no indication that we were getting the vaccine anytime soon. And at that, the whole time, it just kind of seemed like Vietnam's approach to the situation was just like, keep it out, and then we'll be fine when it goes away.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it started to get a little bit uncomfortable knowing that no one was vaccinated, and that if there was a big outbreak, I guess, or a lot of cases, then how would they be able to maintain? And that was always the scary part here, I think, which is why they closed the borders, because the health system would not be able to cope with the amount of, if there was a massive outbreak. And it did feel that later in the year, but I don't think it ever maybe collapsed like some places can.
Yeah. I've mentioned it before, and it's something that people ask me quite often: how's the healthcare system in Vietnam? For us, it's awesome, but I'm very, very conscious of the fact that we have private healthcare insurance with our jobs, and that gives us access to a different standard of healthcare. Just if you had private healthcare in Australia or the UK or wherever, standard government healthcare, from what we know, is great, but it's not the nicest facilities. You're not going to get like nice bedrooms. It's going to be no aircon. Might be, I don't
Metal
think
table.
dirty, yeah, but like just not a pleasant, comfortable environment. And it's not, I mean, I don't think any healthcare systems were ready for that level of need and care for people. And Vietnam definitely wasn't ready for it. So that was partly why they were so strict on locking the country. But what happened next was Omicron came, and that was the variant.
Yeah, that was I think that was the fourth wave, right?
I think so.
Let me just stop you there. It's 10 to 7.
Oh,
we need
shit.
to eat.
Adrie, tell the secret sauce behind making a podcast. Where have we just been?
Secret sauce? Definitely not. We just came back from bachata lessons.
And I am the worst dancer in the world, as expected.
No comment.
That's so harsh. So I'm going to do a podcast soon about things to do in Saigon if you don't want to drink. And there's a fun town. We've talked about this on other podcasts. There's loads of fun things to do. Most of it revolves around drinking. But I saw, just actually meant to tell you this, I saw yesterday somebody post literally, what do we do in Saigon apart from drink? Like it is
We'll post that every few months.
Yeah, it's a common thing,
Yeah.
especially if you're new here. I mean, we're not even new here, and you do have to think out the box a little bit. But you can find stuff. So one of the things is we just went to bachata class. So if we look different, if we look a bit sweatier than like just the last minute, then that is why. So let's pick up though from where we left off. So we get to April, May 2021. Life had been good in Saigon. Life had been good in Vietnam. And then Omicron hit. And what happened next?
It started relatively slowly, excuse me. I think it was probably just after the long holiday, maybe mid-May, when they first started and put restrictions and shut down gyms. And then it kind of, like, week by week, something else, we kind of lost access to something else. Like, eventually the parks were shut, and then restaurants were limited, and like bars and stuff. I remember we were really cautious, and I think we kind of put ourselves on a self-imposed bit of a lockdown more than was actually the case in June. Because I remember we would kind of go out, walk around the block, but we didn't go to bars and restaurants and things like that, just to keep ourselves safe, because of what I had mentioned earlier, was that people weren't vaccinated and all that stuff. But then towards the end of June is when it really, like, shit really hit the fan. And the way they did it here was they would issue like decrees, and on a Monday or something, and it would be a numbered decree. And that decree would have the restrictions or the whatever was in place for the next, usually it was like 2 weeks, right? So at the end of June, it was like, that's when it really started to get bad. Like, I think the first kind of, obviously they closed everything. You couldn't really do anything. It was essential workers only kind of thing. Everyone was working from home. But you could still go out for a walk, like I said. You could still go to like the store, no restrictions, whatever. And then eventually they made, what was it like? I think the biggest, darkest thing was when they started to issue the grocery store vouchers. So they delivered vouchers to our apartment, and they
Came under the door, didn't they?
And it was like, yeah, what day you could go to the grocery store. And like the mall was obviously shut. That was the store that we used to go to. And then like 2 weeks later, what was it? I can't remember the like increasing level of restrictions. I just know by the end of August, we were absolutely not allowed to leave the confines of our apartment for any reason. We had to get delivered groceries.
Well, with gyms and bars and first, then restaurants. And so when the gyms closed, including the gym in our building, like Adrie mentioned, we would be going out for walks all the time and drinking beer while we did it, because the bars were closed as well. So it was quite funny. Like, if anyone knows Tao Dien, like the Tao Dien loop was just packed. There was so many people and everyone was out walking. Lots of people had beers. And it was kind of fun. A lot of businesses were starting to work online, and then it just started to get more and more serious, didn't it? So you're hearing more and more reports of this. Omicron by this point was just going wild. Really had to protect the healthcare service, the healthcare system. The vaccines weren't coming anytime soon by that point.
Well, no, they were actually. So I think in the rest of the world, people had started to get their first vaccine in like early 2021 or late 2020. I can't remember the exact time. And it seemed like it was really late for Vietnam. But once they locked down the country, or at least the big cities, in late June, that's when they were trying to get access to the vaccine. And I remember it was really weird, because they had like the first round of vaccines that came in, they were given to like a select few government workers. And then after the government workers, it was like international school teachers. Like, it was very weird. The people that, like, the order of people that got vaccines.
Healthcare workers as well.
Well, obviously those people, but I remember like the first expats that we knew of were like the ones that were working for closely with government or international school teachers. And then I think we got our first vaccine in July. And that was when a lot of people started to get their first vaccine, or their first dose anyway. And then we got our second one in August.
Couldn't have been that close, could it?
September.
September.
Yeah, maybe September.
But you mentioned, so when we got the vouchers for the store, so we would go to a Winmart at the time, Winmart now. Big branding change there from Winmart to Winmart. It was in the mall, and the mall was obviously closed, so it was really weird, wasn't it? Because we'd go to the grocery store, and we weren't allowed to go together at one point, right? So we had these vouchers, you couldn't go together. It was one at a time. Obviously, you had to sanitize your hands to go in, but we had to walk through the mall to get to the grocery store. So that was like the start of things being like really apocalyptic, because
all the lights were off. There was no one there.
In the middle of the day, it's like a Wednesday or something. So that's when things started to feel weird, which I don't know if in the US or the UK or Australia, I don't know because I wasn't there, if it ever got like that. Because you always heard about people going
shopping malls and stuff were probably shut
in
some places, but everything was so different every different place.
I feel like there's not many places as well where the supermarket is in the mall, but some places. But anyway, it was just weird. I remember going around the supermarket, taking photos of everything, sending you pictures, being like, do I get this? Do I get this? Do I get that? Adrie makes fun of me because I bought like a 5 kg bag of rice.
That was when we went together. That was the panic buying before they restricted our grocery outings. We were together and Niall bought this like giant bag of rice. We've never bought rice in the grocery store in Vietnam at that point. We've been here for like 5 years.
We're still eating it.
He was like, we have to get rice. I think we did use it, to be fair. It was good to have some staples.
But that was right. That was a panic buying, because so you would hear things on Facebook and not really from the media, maybe a little bit, or from friends of friends, like, oh, by the way, the new decree's coming out the next day. So it was always like second guessing what the next decree was going to be. Like, tomorrow it's going to be this is banned, that is banned, and sometimes it came true and sometimes it didn't, and I can't remember if it came true but on this occasion, I think it was supermarkets are going to be closed or regulated by tomorrow.
It went from like having full access to the supermarket to being restricted to certain days to then delivery only, right?
Like delivery from the yeah.
Like you could still go out to the supermarket, and then one day they shut that down. I guess that was in August.
Yeah.
And you could only get deliveries from the grocery store. There were like certain people in our apartment block that were allowed to go and do some of the grocery shopping and deliver some of the groceries. That was even before. And then they stopped that. And then it was literally you could only get grocery store deliveries from the stores themselves or the shops themselves or whatever. And in our apartment complex, there was like 5 towers, and you used to be able to get your delivery straight to the tower. And then eventually they stopped that and they made one central like entrance point where all of the deliveries had to come. And I remember when you went to get our like box of groceries, like you like recorded it and it was like, I'm out for the first time. This is the furthest I walked, because we hadn't left the confines of our building and like just the parking garage and the little outside bit for Biscuit.
Thought I'd share my experience. It's the first time I've been out the house in like a month or something. I've been as far away from the house as I've been in like 3 months. So we got a food delivery, but anyone who knows Saigon knows the situation's pretty fucked. Delivery? Yeah. So I have to come all the way to the front door to get my food, which I think it's this one maybe. So it's interesting when we talk to people from back home or whatnot, as I mentioned right at the beginning, everybody's lockdown story or everyone's pandemic time story was different. And in Vietnam, so what I guess the point to make is 2020 was like heaven, right? And we didn't really want to share it. We didn't want to share it with people. But then 2021 couldn't have been more opposite. And we faced one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. Not the strictest, because we've heard stories in China and things like that. But I think compared to anything that had been like, so in Australia, in the UK, US, we always heard if there was a lockdown, you were allowed to leave your apartment for an hour a day to exercise and things like this. And people found solace in that, and they would walk the dogs and meet other
Loopholes
people.
in that.
And what?
Loopholes in that.
Well, and loopholes in that as well. There's always a loophole. Whereas when it got to August, we were not allowed to leave the apartment at all. And so it became like pretty difficult.
It was really nerve-wracking because, as you know, we have a dog, and there was always the fear that our building itself would get locked down. So we were quite fortunate in the building we lived in, because just outside of it we had a little yard, and we could our building guards were really friendly compared to some of the other building guards. So they would let us come out with our dog. She could use the bathroom. But I remember, like, I took a paper towel down once and like let her pee on it and put it in a bag just in case we were going to have to force her to pee or whatever, do her business on the balcony, which she never would have done anyway. But we heard horror stories about dogs that just couldn't leave their apartment. Maybe their owner got COVID, or maybe their building got locked down and they had to, basically their poor animals didn't use the bathroom for like 3 or 4 days, and it's just awful.
Or there was a
stories.
mad scramble to buy like these garden boxes that you could put in the corner of your apartment, because so many people live in apartments here. Like, there's not many houses. It's not like housing estates
Yeah.
back home.
And when you got COVID, if you did test positive, they would take your key card away. You literally couldn't
Yeah.
leave
They
your
would
apartment.
tape your door shut, like literally, like
Caution
you couldn't
tape.
get out.
You're locked in there until you are clean.
Yeah. So, in terms of like mental health, we already said it's quite difficult not being able to leave the country, not being able to go home, see your family. And then it goes from you're not able to leave Vietnam to you literally cannot leave your apartment. And saying it again, everyone's story is different. We knew we were very lucky because we had each other and we had Biscuit, and there was many people, and we had a nice view to the outside that at least we could see. Whereas we know other people live in like tiny little apartments down a hem with nobody else to talk to, and they're stuck at home all day. So again, that experience, I'm sure it was probably worse than ours, but ours wasn't great either. So you went online teaching, which you can explain how horrible it is. Teaching online to students, to young adult
I mean,
students.
If anyone has taught online, then they would know, yeah, how soul destroying it is to just teach to a bunch of like camera off screen, begging and pleading for students to interact with you. My school didn't have a camera on policy, and we weren't allowed to like enforce it or make them turn on their cameras. So yeah, 4 hours a day, and you have to plan every second of that online lesson, as opposed to being able to kind of freestyle some stuff in class or change what you want to do at the last minute. If you didn't have a document prepared for them to use or some sort of plan for them to do in their breakout rooms, like it was a lot. It was pretty intense.
And then from my point of view, so I started to build this business around doing comedy shows, events, and podcasts. And I was also still part-time teaching. And as a part-time teacher, I just lost all my hours, lost all my business. So my income went down to almost zero. I was able to make a little bit, but not very much at all. Your income was okay, right? But so financially we were.
Well, we weren't spending any money apart
That
from
was
rent.
that was the good thing. We were not spending like anything at all. So we were okay, but we were not doing the best, which also affects like your mental health and your relationship, I guess, as well. Like, just with being on top of each other 24 hours a day. We do enjoy.
I think we did okay.
We did okay. We had a lot of fun. I mean, I'll probably post some pictures as we're talking. Like, we couldn't go anywhere for my birthday, so we like turned our spare room into a hotel room, and we had like a hotel room night.
That wasn't for your birthday, but it's okay.
See, this is why she's here, right? What would that fall in?
That was
Anniversary? Right.
We had a staycation.
Yeah, we had a
Our spare
staycation.
bedroom.
We used the spare bathroom. We did a spa day.
That was your birthday.
That was my birthday. We cooked a lot of good food, but
I cooked a lot of good food.
Let's get that right.
Let the record
I
show
ate a lot of good food.
that Neil sat at his computer while I cooked.
I made the cocktails. That was my job.
You were the cocktail and the barista.
We like rarely have spirits in the apartment, but like we had a cabinet full of spirits.
Well, apartment had to be our gym, our cocktail bar, our beer bar, our restaurant, our spa.
I remember one day in the beginning when you don't realize it was going to go that long, I remember having like making an espresso martini at like 11 a.m. or something one day. Because it was like,
It was a Saturday, right?
yeah, I think it was a Monday. But anyway, you were stuck at home and you had nothing else to do. And it was like, and your students can't see if you got a coffee espresso martini on the camera. So, no, you never did that. It was only me. But I remember that one time. But so it progressively got worse and worse to the point where you didn't know where you were going to get food from. There was like, it was kind of fend for yourself a little bit. There was a new decree that said the government was going to come and bring like rice. It was literally like that movie Contagion, if you've seen that. That never happened. The government never came to our apartment buildings anyway.
But it did. Some of the local buildings, yeah.
Yeah,
had
but not to ours.
deliveries. But we didn't think we would get it because we lived in a nice building.
But so it was, you basically left to fend for yourself. So there was these like Zallo groups that you could join, and there was, like Adrie mentioned, some volunteer shoppers basically that would go and do your shopping for you. It was, I mean, there was things like that were incredible. People were so beautiful, so amazing. And then just one day, they just lifted the lockdown like that, didn't they?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, to go back, like the only time we could leave our apartment was when we, like, to actually drive anywhere, was to get your vaccine. And I guess this ties into what you're about to, or what you just said, was that's what it was. I remember I got my second vaccine, I think it was the 27th of September. So it was the very end of the month. And I was driving out of Taudine and I had to go to my university to get the vaccine. So from District 2 all the way to District 7, crossing through 4 districts to get there. And we had seen pictures and heard urban legends of like barbed wire, like barricades in certain parts of the city, and I had encountered it one time. I think when I went to get my first vaccine, there was, the way I usually go to work, I couldn't go into District 1 because I have to go into District 1 for just like 2 seconds before I make a U-turn to go out to District 4, and I couldn't do that, so I had to go a slightly different way. And then this time on September 27th, that was when I saw them removing the barricades on my way back from the vaccine, I think. And October 1st is when they lifted.
Without much warning, right?
No, that was the first rumor. That was a Monday, and that was when the rumors started to fly. People were like, oh, they're taking down the barricades, they're taking down the barbed wire, I think they're going to lift the lockdown. And I was like, I don't believe it. There's no way. And then, yeah, the rumors were true. Like from 30th of September, I always say you couldn't buy a banana on your own. And on the 1st of October, if you wanted to go buy a sofa in a store, you could.
Yeah,
if you wanted to go shopping for a ball gown or something that you really didn't need, the stores were open. You could go buy that, but you couldn't buy your own basic necessities and food on your own the day before.
Are you saying that because I went and bought a ball gown? No, it was so weird that it just was so dramatically over. But part of that was because they'd rolled out the vaccines. And so I think people would agree with us. And in our experience, things can happen in Vietnam. It can take a long time to happen. And then when it happens really quickly. And that was a really good example, or bad example, whichever way you look at it. It took a long time to get the vaccines here. But once they got them, it went from like 1% of the population vaccinated, 10% for a while in June. By like August, it was 90% of the population had been vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, you have to hand that to the people of Vietnam. Like, if they are told, do this, everyone's like, okay, we are doing this for the benefit and the greater good of everyone else. Unlike some other places where they're like, no, not my body, not my this, whatever. Like,
yeah.
There was none of that here. I mean,
yeah, everyone wears masks anyway, so there was no like anti-mask brigade. People have been wearing masks here for pollution and for colds for years. But so things opened up, but things didn't go back to normal immediately. So bars still couldn't open fully. They could do delivery, restaurants.
It didn't take that long for them to. I can't really remember, to be honest. I know, again, we were pretty cautious when it first lifted.
But we were excited as hell. But for me, as a business, so I then started to carve out like an online niche. So I was doing quiz nights for businesses around Vietnam and in Saigon. I was doing comedy nights like for people around the world. We had like one comedy night, like 50 people online. We had an amazing lineup, really figuring out how to do things online and entertain people. And I remember even did like a football match. We watched a classic FIFA World Cup match. It was only me and 2 other people, but it was 2 other people that I'd never hadn't spoken to in years, and we watched the game together online. And so there was some good things happening, and I was starting to make a little bit of money from that. And then suddenly everything opened. So obviously nobody wanted to be online. Like I tried one more quiz night after that, and I think nobody showed up because, of course, nobody wanted to sit at home and do a quiz night when they could just go out.
Yeah.
But then we also couldn't do quiz nights in person or comedy shows.
Well, no one wanted to go out, really.
No. And so...
Like, I would say the flow of things didn't get back to normal until, like, you could tell people were feeling confident about going out. God, it probably took at least 6 months.
I was going to say the same, yeah, at least 6 months.
Because we didn't get our first round of COVID until March 2022.
Yeah.
And we went to a arguable super spreader event.
A comedy show.
But that was when that was around the time when we kind of started to let our guard down and went out. And then we got COVID and locked into our apartment.
And so by now that's 2022.
Yeah. So I think but it wasn't until probably like April, May 2022 when you're like, okay, this feels like Vietnam again or Saigon again. Yeah.
And so that really sums up our life for those last 2 years in life in Saigon. We could go on about that all day. If you have a story to share, like, I want to hear it. Like I said, there's so many stories. Everyone has a different one, good and bad. Let me know about them. The one thing I'm not going to tell you on this episode, but I might record it by myself. I want to share the story of Lewis and me getting the vaccine together.
Did you not already? No, you probably haven't.
One of the coolest things I was going to say about getting the vaccine was it was the only time you saw other people.
Yeah.
You would go to the vaccine like, hey, how you doing? I haven't seen you in like 6 months. Are you okay? Like from across the room because you wouldn't want to talk to each other. There was so many crazy stories. But I'm going to record that separate as an extra bonus episode because that story on its own is absolutely crazy. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Adrie, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For being a guest.
Of course, as always.
As I mentioned, the music is more popular than me, which is by Lewis. And I've also noticed that Adrie is normally always more popular than me. So if you want to have Adrie back on this podcast, if you want to hear more from her, or maybe even she should host an episode by herself, then please let me know as well, because I'm going to make her do it. I try and get her to do these things all the time, and she's so reluctant, but then, it's what the people want. So if you people message me and tell me that you want Adrie to host an episode, or you want to hear and see more of Adrie, then you let me know and I will persuade her. So thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for listening. Remember, the best thing you can do is share this episode. If you liked it, please let somebody else know about it. It's the #1 way that people find out about podcasts. You can also rate and review, follow, subscribe, all of that good stuff as well. And don't forget as well, we have a Patreon now as well. We want to build... Yeah, so what's the name if you become a Patreon member?
Bopsaudayer.
A Bopsaudayer, that's right. So thank you very much to our latest members who've just joined, which is yourself joined, Lewis Wright, who's, as I mentioned, the composer, Pippa Dakin. Pippa? I'll just call you Pippa. Pippa, you know who you are, right? Pippa joined. So make sure you jump on to patreon.com/A Vietnam podcast, or the link will be in the notes. And you can join for free if you want. The minimum as well is like $1 a month, right? So what we want to do is build a community of people who love Vietnam, whether you live here or not. There's so many amazing features on Patreon now where we can have chat groups. And if you've watched previous episodes, we've done like pub crawls. I had a party here, which was sponsored by Mixtape, where they gave us a whole bunch of party, which is like a green tea seltzer drink. So we'll do meetups and things like that as well. So please join the Patreon, become a Bopsaudayer. You will be the coolest person in the world. So thank you very much, and I hope you follow us and like us for future episodes. Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah, Bopsaudayer.